last week we were dealing with the concept of activities. You need to refresh your memory a little bit that an activity is an aggregate of actions that are directed towards some object. That each of the individual actions is aimed at achieving some goal, but all these goals contribute towards a more distant object, which is what motivates the activity. And to understand what people are doing, to separate all the little actions they're doing all over the place, is to gather what the activity is. In other words, what the object is of what they're doing. Right? So it's because activity theory is concerned with the object that it is a good theory for getting at the motivations behind what people are doing. Right? So it's good for motivation, studying motivation. Now, the first part of what we're going to do today is just about the object. And it is agreed among all activity theorists that an activity is defined by its object. Right? The interesting thing is that the different strands of activity theory all have a different understanding of what's meant by object. Now, there are a number of other strands of activity theory that I'm not going to touch on, but generally if you can get your head around the different meanings of object for Leontyev, Engeström and Vygotsky, then you've got the lay of the land and you'll be able to navigate your way through any of the different implementations of activity theory. Now, object in itself is an extremely polysemous word. It's a word that has a lot of different meanings attached to it. And sometimes you'll hear people talking about the fact that English only has one word for object, whereas other languages, such as the native language of activity theory, Russian, and the native language for philosophy, German, have two words that are both translated as object. But I've sort of looked into this, and my conclusion is that these other languages are no better off than English, that the ambiguity and polysemy is there both in German and Russian, and where no disadvantage to simply take the word object and understand at each moment what it's meant in its context. But you really need to be aware of the different meanings of object in order to be able to make sense of it. Now, I'll just go over some of the meanings of object that you'll be familiar with. An object is an object, it's a thing. And it's a part of the ordinary language to refer to things as being objects. And what you mean by that is that they're there not just because you think they're really there, and other people will think they're there as well. They're objects. So they have some objectivity. They have the character of being objects in that they're not figments of your mind, but are really existing things. They're objects, okay? Object has some other connotations around it as well to do with being things, but generally speaking, the important thing about saying something's an object is it's there. Object also figures as the opposite to subject. So you have a subject and an object, and they have a particular and very special relation in that something is an object for a subject. It's not just an object in general. So for example, let's get an example. For psychiatry, mental diseases are things which can be cured by drugs. So the way mainstream psychology conceives of mental disease is a very broad, undefined category. It's something that one can apply drugs to, that because they derive from some disorder in the brain, it can be cured by adding chemicals. Right? So the object for mainstream psychiatry is a particular thing. It's particular to that profession. Right? So when we talk about an object, it does mean that it's something that exists independently of the subject. Someone is not just ill because a psychiatrist thinks they're ill. They are really ill. But the way it's conceived is part of a subject-object relation. So, for example, if you take those great concepts like freedom and liberty, that these are concepts that are understood quite differently in different societies. Right? So subject and object have to be understood as pairs, and that's a particular part of the meaning of object. When we say an object, we mean the object for a specific subject. The other thing is that the object is also the thing that you're working on. Say, what are you doing there? I'm working on this car. This car is the object of my activity. I'm working on it. Okay? You might also say, what are you trying to do? What is the object of your work? Oh, to get the car working better. To have a working car. This one's broken. I want a working car. So the object of an activity is to bring about a certain state of the world, not in your imagination, but in the world, according to the laws of nature and society and everything around you, and dependent on them, which is your object. Now, you may have an imagined an image of that condition of the world, which is your object. Okay? It's completely subjective in that sense, you're just imagining it, but it's objective because it's something that you only wish it to be something objective. You don't just wish it as a figment of the mind. Right? So this meaning of object, meaning what you're going to. The object of an athlete is to run around the oval 4 times as fast as you can. Right? Whatever. Okay, so all these meanings are mixed up when we talk about object. And objective and subjective, the adjectives to do with these two concepts, are quite, well, they're not mixed up, they're clear in their meaning when you say objective and subjective, but what we'll be wrestling with in the next few minutes is the subtleties of the relationship between subjective and objective. Now basically, for Leontyev, the object is what you're after, what the activity is directed towards bringing about. He is quite adamant that one of these phrases from this link that the word object is linked to, there is no such thing as an object-less activity. If an activity seems to have no object, that's simply because you don't know it, it'll be there. So every activity is directed towards achieving something. It's the imagined desired objective product of the activity, or its outcome, but it's objective. It's objective in more than one sense. I think the next slide might deal with this, so I'll run to it ahead. It's objective because let's suppose, making it this is trivialising the idea a little bit, but if you think of a hamburger or a McDonald's or something, that might be what I'm trying to get when I'm racing down the street to get there before the shop closes or something. But my need for that isn't just an invention of mine. It's there because I've only got $2 and the only food I can get is going to be that price. There's a whole industry that's producing these things and making them available, and I'm a product of that social cultural history that makes me look to getting a McDonald's to satisfy my hunger. I'm also a human being that gets hungry, and for some reason or other, objective, not probably something I decided to do. I haven't had enough to eat today, and I need them. So something being an object for you, it's not just a whim, it's objective. It arises from the objective world, and me as a part of it. So for instance, the need, every object meets a need, he says. The need itself, although it sort of sits on the subject side of the relation between the object and the need, or the motive and the need, it is also objective. That, for example, food is no good to me, really, because I don't have the ability to get food straight from nature. I need money. And with money I'll buy suitably manufactured food that I know how to eat. Terrible creature that I am. So need is produced itself by activity. For example, what's the need of steel? Who needs steel? No one needs steel. But car manufacturers need steel and people need cars. Who need cars? People that live in cities. Right? So everything that we need is tied up in this intricate set of relations that are inherited from the past, and something is needed as a result of that whole complex set of relations. It's quite objective. So when Leontyev talks about an activity meeting a social need, he means that okay, you may or may not as a person need that, but the need is fundamentally social. It arises from the development of social relations and history. Typically, for Leontyev, it might be a branch of industry. So, for example, under Leontyev's theory, machine guns are a need. People need machine guns. Otherwise, why the hell else would we have a whole industry dedicated to producing them? Obviously, there's a social need for machine guns, and for asbestos for that matter, and MDF, as we were talking about before. That's why they're being produced. Okay, I make these points obviously because there's a weakness in Leontyev's theory there. But at the same time, you could be very, very objective about this and say, okay, it's all very well for you to be critical, but the fact is that we live in a capitalist system, and we haven't got any other system going, and capitalism generates needs for MDF and asbestos, which are poisonous, and machine guns are only useful for killing people, and so on. So objectively, you have to say, yes, these are social needs. And any activity, say, in that industry is directed towards producing them. Now, so the object meets a social need, which itself arises from the activity, okay? But this may differ from the personal sense of the object, which motivates an individual's action. So this is reflecting back on what was discussed last week, that the actions a person takes can be made sense of, in the sense that they're part of an activity aimed at keeping people locked up in prison. Why are you doing that? It's a horrible thing. No, I don't like it. It's terrible. I really sympathise with the people there behind bars, but I've got to earn a living. Right? So Leontyev's idea is that for such a person, the prison doesn't mean a horrible place of incarceration. It means it's a place of work where he meets his friends, how he earns a living, and so on. And it takes on that whole meaning for him, even though he also knows that the whole point of having prisons is to lock people up, because that's what they're for. That's why we have prisons, right? Don't have to be critical about it. That's what prisons are there for. Okay? I didn't do my little printout so I can see what's coming next. That's right. Okay, so have we got the idea of object for Leontyev here? Any questions about that? Okay. When you start pulling this apart, it is quite complex. I've really given a pretty simplistic delivery of it, but I suppose we should just leave it at that. We've got a firm grasp of it. Let's not try and confuse things. The object for Engeström is something different. It's the raw material on which at which the activity is directed, which is transformed into the outcome. The object carries in itself the purpose and motive of the activity. Now that last sentence, the object carries in itself the purpose and motive of the activity, is a sentence I copied from a recent paper of Engeström that's just in press at the moment. It seemed to say pretty clearly the relation. The description of the object as the raw material is from his website in the University of Helsinki, which has been there for like 20 years. It's a long-running definition. Okay, so to simplify the contrast between Engeström and Leontyev here is that what Leontyev is calling the object, Engeström is calling the outcome. Yeah.
I'm interested that he said the object itself carries both purpose and motive.
carries in itself. So, for example, if you're in an old people's home, those old people are the object that you're working on, for example.
But, yeah, see, I was also interested when you said, and I agree with you, objective is a thing. Like,
yeah. Well, it can be people, but
and,
yeah.
And that was, I was challenged once when someone said you were turning people into objects.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it could have even been me a couple of years ago. I remember challenging someone over that because I was not familiar with how he used the word. It was shocking to me to hear someone talking about, for a teacher, the students are the object.
Yeah, don't worry, it wasn't you. But yeah, you can appreciate why he owns that kind of thing. But let's say these old people, it's, say for example, the fragility of it, like it's the qualities of the object. Is that another way of? That's how I responded. That it's not. You're not going to act on the student or the patient in the same way you'd act on a material part of that. But they have qualities that the subject reads into them. That then
Makes a response.
Yeah, the paper I quoted from there goes on to say disease is the object for medicine. Right? Yeah. Disease is there, it needs to be cured. If someone's a homosexual, you've got to be cured of it. Right? Oh, hang on. Okay, so that's the idea of it. That I mean, in a sense, you do act on. It's not necessarily totally dehumanising. The word is patient. And the word patient has been around in the health industry a long time, but I don't know if it was the Women's Health Collective back in the 70s or whether it was the AIDS movement more recently in the 80s and 90s, but somehow or other, in Australia at least, the health services learnt not to refer to their clients as patients.
What do they call them?
Clients usually, which at least has the connotation of equality. You know, like Joe Hockey says, the customer's always right. You know, I know they hate my budget, but they're wrong about that, but they're right about voting for us. You know, this client is problematic as well, but so far as I know, they haven't come up with a better one. You say that
in mental health, there was a couple of years when they started calling patients consumers.
Consumers, oh, I hate that one. Oh, you had I remember a policeman giving a report.
It's on its way out, but they were consumers, consumers of mental health systems.
Services, yeah. There's a policeman I saw reporting on a crime scene, and he referred to, who was he? He was referring to, I think, the criminals as consumers. Yeah, he'd been so inculcated with this neoliberal stuff. And I remember being in ICU, what do you call it, the intensive care unit in Royal London Hospital, and they've got this big whiteboard up where they're doing their quality circle stuff, right? And all the nurses have to learn all this jargon, and these people that are dying there are the customers. And up at the ISCAR conference, there was a fellow doing a talk, was it in the health service? It might have been health service or education, and he was using the Engeström triangle, and he was referring to the clients, whatever, as customers. So long as they're the objects, really, no amount of new words is going to cover this up. It's not as bad as treating them simply as objects, meaning they're just things that don't have a will, right? Because that's only one restricted meaning of an object. For Hegel, for instance, the subject-object relation means that the object is a subject equally with the subject. It's a relation between two subjects. So, for example, if you have a social movement as a subject, the object is mainstream society. So there's nothing at all denigrating in the Hegelian way of calling something an object. It is, in fact, the existing way. It's the dominant subject, in fact. But since most of us know terms like objectification and treating someone as an object, when you start talking about the people that enter an old people's home or a hospital or a mental health service as your object, that really cuts against the grain. And I think for good reason, because implicitly here, they are the raw material that you're working with. They have a condition, their condition is unproblematic, it needs to be cured. Now, okay, so the contrast between Engeström and Leontyev is not huge there. If I say the object is to produce this particular product, and I say, excuse me, Jimmy, you've got it already and that's the object you're working on, now you're going to produce it. No, it doesn't exist now, that's what I want to bring about. So you say, well, forget Engeström then, you're using Leontyev. I don't know about Leontyev. But so when people use Engström's system, so ingrained is the idea of object as something you're trying to achieve, that they generally, or not generally, often ignore the fact that according to Engeström, as it is in this particular setup, it's the object to be worked upon. And the outcome, well, this is the thing. Engström is not really a psychologist. He theorizes organizations and small groups and so on. He's a sociologist, really. So he has a quite objective attitude towards people's intentions. So the outcome isn't something that, neither the outcome nor the object are things that the activity system was set up to create, and that all the people involved in the activity system know about and have in their mind. Right? That he says at one point that as a preliminary you need to talk to people and do some phenomenological work. It means you have to get some key on what people are thinking about in order to make sense of the activity. But his attitude towards the activity is an objectivist one. So the outcome is the outcome. It is no question about it being an unintended outcome. It is the outcome. And your actions are to be interpreted in the light of the outcome that was brought about. Okay? Now, there's a German word called Arbeitsgegenstand. Arbeit is work. Gegenstand is a German word for object, meaning what stands against. And it is a passage in Marx's Capital where he refers to, well, it's translated in English as the subject of labour. The original German word is Arbeitsgegenstand, which clearly translates into the object of labour. And I find that this translation issue is useful to get a handle on the depth of ambiguity involved here. But in this picture of a little blacksmith, the object, the Arbeitsgegenstand, is the iron that he's working with. The tools is the hammer. He's the subject. And you have an activity system there which is obviously reduced to just being an individual. It's not the typical case that Engeström deals with. He'd deal with a whole metal shop probably. But that's how things are set up. Okay? Tools is not used in Engeström, as it's not used in activity theory or Vygotsky generally, in a metaphorical way. Tools means tools. Doesn't mean, so the activity theory is not a tool. Now, it's a perfectly legitimate way of using the English language, but that's just to be aware that when Engeström, like anyone else in activity theory, uses the word tool, they mean a tool. They mean a material. When I say material object thing, it can be a material process or substance. It could even be a book, like a manual, a how-to manual. But it's got to be a material thing. It's not a concept. Right? So Engström's activity does not address how the outcome is not intended by individuals, but focuses on the actions. And as you can see by the comparison, the analogy of outcome is like Leontyev's object. Okay? Now, I'm just introducing you to this particular concept which has come out of, I think, called a boundary object. In this little illustration, but imagine the big log there is the boundary object. We take the two woodcutters, there's two people that are cooperating there. They're each their own independent activity system. Again, I'm simplifying to the point of triviality here to make the point. And they have a shared tool, and they have a boundary object. The tree is meaningful for both of them. Therefore, they cooperate on cutting the tree in two. Now, this idea of a boundary object is a useful concept for dealing with large complex systems. So if you see the world's made up of activity systems, you've got this firm over here, this government department over here, this family here, whatever. These are all different activity systems. How does that mesh together into a social formation? Well, it does so through boundary objects. Now, object here is again something that is worked on, not to be taken necessarily as a thing. It could be a disease, it could be a traffic problem, whatever it is. But it's material in the sense it's real. And it's a boundary object because each of the different parties that are related to this object have their own relation to it, understand it in their own way. So typically what you'd be looking at here is an interdisciplinary team that's brought together by government to solve some big social problem. So you have some biochemists, some demographers, but we call people that deal with population and so on. Is that demography? Whatever.
Ethnography.
Sorry?
Ethnography.
Oh, ethnographers as well. That's right. So these different disciplines come in. They all have a different understanding of this boundary object, and they all bring an activity system with them, with their own concepts, their own ways of working, their own rules, their own tools, their own everything, the theory, and they interconnect with each other by sharing the boundary object. That's what's called a boundary object, because it exists on a boundary between different systems. And this concept then allows you to theorize about how you may have interaction between different activity systems. Because if what we're on about is activity system, that's Engeström's word for an activity. And he does mean it, and what he insists he means as a unit of analysis. A unit of analysis of what? Well, presumably something which is made up of many thousands of activity systems. So it's meant to be a unit of analysis of an entire social formation. But mostly he just deals with one of them, so it's not a unit of analysis in that sense. It's actually the entire system, which is divided into elements, not units. But in the context of, for instance, dealing with, say, climate change, you've got a hugely complex problem involving many, many different systems and people interacting together. How would you theorise that? Well, you take the subject matter of the climate and all the different activity systems that are relevant to that, and you can discuss their cooperation on the basis of how each of them relates to that object. And you deal with things that how the object looks differently from each different point of view, and then consequently you can understand the misunderstandings that occur between people belonging to different activity systems and so on. And that's his approach. The framework is set up for dealing with using activity theory to deal with larger problems, as opposed to the nicely encapsulated problem. Here you have an old people's home, the old people need to get some exercise, they're not because the nurses just do everything for them. How can they get around it? A nice enclosed problem, but it fits neatly into the triangle. If you look into a large problem, you know, climate change, the Abbott government or whatever, then you need to look at different activity systems. So you generally, you're there activating the idea of the activity system as a unit of analysis of a large social problem, and it's theorised mainly through the shared raw material. Generally speaking, when you have, for instance, a contest over who should run the country between different political parties, they all share the same raw material. They're all sharing this land, Australia, and its institutions and its people, and they all have different theories about what to do about it, and all their actions are necessarily collaborative actions where they interact with each other and they jointly produce an outcome. Right? So that's a way that you can approach understanding the social and political system in Australia. Okay? But with Engeström's work, it's on its home base in dealing with the problems that arise within an organisation, such as a clinic or a small business. And if you can put two of those together with a boundary object, then that's a huge step forward. Right? And further development requires adding further ones with sharing that same boundary object. Okay? Now, to go on to how the object is understood for Vygotsky. Now, the accepted knowledge is that Vygotsky didn't have an activity theory, right? Because the activity theory was developed by those that came after him. But this is just playing with words, because Leontyev was the first to give a very specific meaning to the word activity, whereas Vygotsky didn't give it that specific meaning, but he did have a theory of activity. It was just different to Leontyev's and different to Engeström's. And the basic concepts that he produced were inherited by those that came after him, but they didn't use the same approach to activity. Right? But my own view is that it's a very good theory of activity. So, for Vygotsky, the object is part of the concept the subject forms of some task or problem. The concept is the form of activity by means in which the object is realised. Okay, so if we have a disease, you can form different concepts of that disease. You might say, this isn't a disease at all, it's a perfectly normal condition for a human being. Just, don't worry about your 15-year-old child, they're going through a phase, just give them some space and they'll be all right. No need to give them drugs. Right? Or you might say, I think this can be dealt with a talking cure, I'll send you off to Professor Schmidt and he'll sort it out for you. Or you might take it as a neurological dysfunction that requires you to administer a chemical. Okay, so there are different concepts of the problem. It may be that it's not a problem at all. So if we say that the motive is, what was the phrase? Just have to go back a little bit. Get the phrase right. The object carries in itself the purpose or motive of the activity. See, I disagree. I think that may often be the case. Let's accept that if there's a disease, the motive of activity relevant to that disease is obviously the cure of the disease. But, okay, there's sort of stating obvious facts is not much value for science. If we're trying to improve the way things go, then we need to be a bit critical about this. So it depends what. No, hang on, go back. Excuse me a bit. I can't predict entirely with my PowerPoint what's going to have to be said at each point. Okay. It first has to be recognised that there is a problem. And for instance, women were kicked around by men for thousands upon thousands of years, and it wasn't really till the late 60s or mid 60s that it became such a problem that a word like sexism entered the language. Okay, there were issues, but it became a problem and a focus of activity in itself only after all these thousands of years. So the identification of something as a problem is itself a process. There has to be the conditions around to form a certain type of concept of the situation. Now, Leontyev was quite dismissive of all Vygotsky's work on concepts, and I think that, can I put it, take that out from Vygotsky's work and there's not a lot left. And it is the very weak point of Leontyev's work, that he sort of accepts that the object of an activity is unproblematic. Whereas Vygotsky says it's not even the problem itself which is definitive of the activity, it's the particular solution you provide to the concept. For example, everyone may agree that this recent spate of people going around killing people and waving Islamic flags as they do so is a problem. Right? But is it a social problem, you know, that maybe the mental health service should get together on to do a bit of community development, or is it a policing problem? Is it a border guarding problem? Right? And in fact, a lot of very big changes take place according to how you frame it. I mean, John Howard brilliantly, evilly, brilliantly reframed the issue of refugees by saying we will decide who comes into our country. I mean, of course, we always have, you know, but by immediately reframing it in terms of people basically sort of illegitimately coming into the country. And then Rudd made a heroic effort to reframe it again as the policy of turning back the boats would create a diplomatic crisis with Indonesia. He turned it into a diplomatic problem. It didn't save his skin, but okay, the concept, the frame that you put an issue in, and therefore the concept you make of it, because concepts aren't just self-standing, concepts belong to theory. So when you form a concept, it evokes a whole system of concepts. Right? So it's similar to the issue of framing. Framing is the idea that you take a particular image or situation and you put it within a frame that says that this is a certain kind of thing, should be looked at in a certain way. So what this meant for Vygotsky is that the separate actions relate to the object in the same way that word meanings relate to the concept. Now this is something that people can't see why I say it's the same. I accept that it's a bit of a leap. But Vygotsky studied activity in his chapters that headed the concept formation. You see, that when the children were moving blocks around to try and make an arrangement of blocks that solved the problem, where they were all put together under the same heading, that he was going to put it, each action is like a word meaning. But when you utter a word, that's an action. What's the relationship between that action of uttering a word, say doing something with a word, and the concept that it evokes? It's not a direct relation. If you say, oh, I'll step back, but take building a house. There are 1,000,001 different actions involved in building a house. Carrying a bucket of cement from there to there, putting a brick on top of this one, digging a trench in the footpath. They all make sense only in the light of the way they're contributing to the formation of a house. Well, a concept in the same way is made sense of, or words are made sense of, when you see all the different ways a set of words may be used that suddenly makes sense. Oh, you're talking about it in this way. You've got this kind of concept of it. Right? It's a relation of making sense of a lot of individual things. When you take, there might be some scientific problem that's come up. People don't understand why beehives are collapsing. Someone comes up with an explanation of it, and all the separate observations suddenly fall into place. Oh, it's to do with, I don't know the answer, I don't think anyone does, but it's to do perhaps with the temperature, or it's to do with the importation of some other bug or something. Right? So you form a particular concept of it, and then all the separate observations are made sense of in that way. Right? So, very clearly, the object is then not just a puzzle, or we have to form a concept of it, but it reflects a social position. In the illustration, you see a woman looking very cheesed off by obviously being lumped with the housework. She's formed a certain concept of this task, which is not the one that was apparently intended for her. She's not at all happy with it. She doesn't see it as a role in life. She sees it as a drudge and an unfair share. Okay? So the same task can be looked at differently according to social positions. That's after all why we're all living in some wonderful utopia, slapping each other on the back and, feeling happy about things. There's all sorts of conflicts going on because we see different things differently according to the social position. So once we accept that it isn't that the object simply unproblematically exists, or that it's carried implicitly within the object, that the purpose, what has to be done, is simply carried within the object, but it depends on the concept that's formed of it. Right? There's not a certain situation, a lineup of things and people and whatever, doesn't automatically lead to what has to be done. The conception of the situation depends on forming a concept of it. How do you form a concept? Well, it does come back to consciousness. It means that there's a mediating element between the subject and object there. You have to utilise your prejudices, your friends and family, your resources. So, for example, Leontyev takes encounter with a dangerous bear as an example. And he simply makes the point, it might be an occasion for running for your life, or it might be an occasion of great joy, depending on whether you were a hunter or whether you were just going for a stroll and weren't looking out for a bear. So the social position depends. The concept you form of one and the same environment, can't really say situation, but say environment, depends. It also depends on the available means. So if it may be a hunter out on a hunting trip, but if, for example, he's just gone around behind the bush and left his gun at the campsite, he will react the same way. He won't be overjoyed to see the bear at all. He'll be very scared, even though he is a hunter, because the available means to shoot the bear are not available. So the means are many and varied by which we form a concept of some situation, and that will vary according to social position. So that's how I would sum up the three different forms of activity theory. There's a lot of overlap between them. I've tried to bring out the contrasts, but I would say that any of the different approaches, could be understood by the different theories. They're not, not as if one or other theory has a complete blind spot to certain issues, but the basic way they're set up orients them to problems in a certain way. So for Leontyev, it's the object is the situation in the objective world that the activity is aimed at bringing about. Right? It's the object of the activity. For Engeström, it's the raw material that the activity is working upon. It being taken that what you want to do with that raw material will come out of your contact with it. You'll learn about it, and the outcome will follow from that. For Vygotsky, the actions, let's say that the activity will be dependent on, or will reflect, the concept formed of the situation. Okay, do you want to have a talk about this? Yes, Roland.
I think you were talking about Vygotsky. You mentioned separation theory and what's that? Separation actions and the object and word meaning and the concept.
Yeah.
What do you mean by separation?
I don't actually recall using the word separation.
Can you go back a few slides?
But how did word meaning get tied up in this?
It's the same relationship between something and object. And
yeah, I know what you're talking about. Okay, the
concept.
Trying to understand a whole set of actions, right? How can you make sense of a whole diverse set of actions, right? Now, sort of mainstream analytical theory says you look for something in common between all these actions. And if you can say, everyone seems to be trying to head off towards the centre of town, that's what's going on. Well, that would be a nice, easy case, wouldn't it be? Yeah, if they're all heading in the same direction. But usually actions are not so easily decoded in that way. If you saw a lot of building workers building a house, you'd probably pretty quickly pick up that they were building a house, because there'd be a lot of clues, right? The type of work they do, the place they were, and the way they dressed, and all sorts of things you probably piece it together. But generally speaking, it's an act of human magic how we can look at a whole set of actions and say, oh, this is what people are doing. And it's by saying it's like the relation of a word meaning to a concept, I'm trying to draw it down to really basic logic. That when you look at what a word means, it can't be resolved easily by saying, well, this word meant that, this word meant that, this word meant that. They all have something in common. That's the meaning of the word. The words are brought together and made sense of by concepts, but concepts, the best you can do is to say they have their origin in some social problem. Yeah? And that problem develops right through an entire system of life, and words and actions take on meaning in relation to that problem. And the idea of a concept captures that. Yeah? And it's only Vygotsky, I think, here that has grasped that it isn't just sharing something in common, which explains the unity of a lot of diverse things, but it has to be a concept. Okay?
Yeah. Can I just try and explain that? So then maybe you can see what I'm understanding.
Yeah, you've been good at explaining things simply in the past. How you can go.
So you're saying separate actions are in a sense a clue as to what the activity might be.
Yeah,
so
it's the only clue you've got, in fact.
That action, they're trying to do this.
That's right.
And then the action, the sort of activity that they're doing is something that, to a degree, can pre-exist.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's some clues, and then that's what they're doing.
Yeah, the activity is the answer to the problem. What are all these people trying? What are all these actions directed at?
So it's a pre-existing. There's a pre-existing concept of the activity.
Yes.
And then it's just a guess. There's these different clues that lead you to getting an idea of what activity they're up to.
Yeah, I mean, Leontyev says that activity may seem to be objectless, but every activity has an object, and the issue is to discover what it is. Right? So it's a sort of basic psychological work is what's going on here? What's this person trying to do? What's motivating them? So understanding human actions, yeah.
So even a person wandering aimlessly through a park, nothing to do on a Sunday afternoon, they've still got an object.
Yeah.
It's the enjoyment of the park or something.
Yeah. Got a problem to think over, needs to get away, whatever, is watching out for
So
people.
they're not necessarily physically doing anything per se, it's just that they are.
Yeah, consciousness of what that object is not essential to it. Right? So that, for example, people can engage in preeminently social activities for their own motives or with their own understanding of what they're doing, but Leontyev is saying, well, the object of this is actually so and so. Whatever you think about it, this is the object of it. Right? So you may think prisons are set up there to punish poor people, but actually they're there to keep law and order and make life nice, right? So for Leontyev, there is an objective meaning, or an objective meaning to an activity, and that insistence on the objectivity, in my view, needs to be qualified. But that's the basic idea of it. So as Roland's suggesting, the activity in a sense pre-exists, and you can join it. Yeah? Now, every so often, someone will launch a new activity, right? But that's rare. It's rare. mostly people think, oh, I'll join MSCP. They're a great group. They put on all the talks, right? But so thousands of people, MSCP are the people that put on this show, right? Thousands of people have participated in these summer schools and winter schools, but there was only one occasion, I don't know, 20 years ago, where someone got the idea, oh, let's put on summer schools for, people outside academia that want to talk about philosophy. Right? So generally speaking, they're things you join, but they're still created by people. But just the percentages are that 99% of the time you're joining and only 1% of the time you're launching, or more so. That's an important distinction to make though, because you might think of activities as just something, I think I'll go shopping. Right? But the point is, what's the object of shopping? Well, it's distribution of the product to the consumer. Right? So your personal contribution to that may be personally motivated, but going shopping is a societally established need and activity. Right? There were times when shops didn't exist, and there were times when going shopping was just a meaningless thing. It's been created through cultural development of history, right? And we all do it as a result. Got no choice. Well, there might be choices, but sending someone else to do the shopping or whatever. Okay, so the complex relation between subject and object are always at play here. Nothing is ever simply subjective or simply objective. There's always an element of both sides involved in it. Sorry?
So, one more comment.
Yeah, please.
So the object is a creation of. The object isn't exactly objective. The object is a creation of the subject. The object doesn't exist outside the social construct.
It's difficult to answer the question, of course, because there are so many different meanings of object in play here.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take us somewhere, a line down the centre of these meanings, and say, let's look at the subject-object relation. Okay, the object in that context of a subject-object relation, the object exists independently of the subject. That's the whole point. The subject wakes up in the morning and it finds the object there.
So the object exists independent of an individual, but it doesn't exist independent of a society. No,
the society is, of course, the context of the whole thing. That's right. So we're talking about an object existing in a particular social context, right? But so I wake up and bang, and oh, damn, it's still there, or the object is still there, right? But it's my object in the sense that it's the thing out there in the world that I'm worried about and I'm directing my activity towards. But I didn't create it. Yeah? So if I got annoyed by all the confusion around the meaning of chat terms, right, that was there, right? I noticed it and decided to put some effort into doing something about it, right? But I didn't create that confusion, right, so that I have something to do, right? So, in fact, my whole object will be to get rid of it, right? But it's my object. Other people would say, no, it doesn't exist. People are quite clear. Oh, you're the one that's confused, Andy. Don't worry about it. Okay? So, but whether I was right thinking there's a lot of confusion about the concepts of activity theory or not, whatever it is, it's objective. Yeah?
Another example I'm thinking of in teaching, for example, if the object is a student, and they might be bilingual, like speak two languages, one teacher might see that raw material as like something to embrace, and so how they relate to getting the student to the next grade, for example, if that's their outcome, they might use both languages to kind of take a very linguistically rich approach to teaching, whereas another teacher might see like the child's got two languages, regardless of which teacher's looking at them. But the other teacher might read that object as the other language is an inference.
Yeah. We don't want you guys using that street language in this classroom, okay? It's confusing. Speak English. Yeah.
So their efforts to get them to the next year, they might enact a whole heap of other actions. So it's exactly the same child, but teacher A and teacher B reads the object in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, what you say is correct, but of course in the language of Engeström's theory, the object may contain the problem, but it's not equal to the problem. So, for example, otherwise, how do you explain what's meant by a boundary object? And the whole idea of it is one object, such as the social and political system of the country, but it's conceived differently by the different parties, who might, for example, collaborate in forming a parliament and passing laws together. Right? So it's a boundary object. Because it exists independently of all of them, they all find different tasks and problems arising out of it. But it's in that lexicon, the object, that boundary object, exists there, and it contains. I mean, someone told me it can be referred to as a problem space, right? Which is an intriguing kind of way to soften the boundaries between the differences. Because if, say, a patient is a problem space, then it leaves it open as to what the problem might be. Yes, please.
Yeah, I wrote down, I know I use problem space in my stuff, but I think it comes from Engeström.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it comes from Engeström, but it's a nice way of sort of squaring the circle in the sense of absolving the conceptual differences between Leontyev and Engeström's thing. If the raw material is understood to be a problem space, and therefore the problem which needs to be solved exists within that raw material, but it doesn't mean to say that there's only one possible problem to be found there that will arise out of the activity. So in that way you can run an interpretation of Engeström that sort of brings it back to meet up with sort of both Vygotsky and Leontyev in a way. So it's a useful thing. I didn't start off talking about a problem space precisely because I didn't want to minimise the differences. I wanted to bring out the differences and making them sharp. But if you're using problem space as what the object is, then the only problem is it's just very abstract, that's all. But it does achieve. Sorry?
Abstract can be good.
Yeah, the abstract can be good. It allows you to treat it as a problem, or to treat it as something. Well, it doesn't quite work as the Leontyev way, does it? Because the problem space is not the intended outcome, but it squares fairly well with the Vygotsky view that if the object is a problem space, then it leaves it open for different concepts of it to be formed. Yeah?
Last week you mentioned, and it seems clearer looking at it the way you've got your bullet points here, first, second and third generation with Vygotsky's first generation.
Yeah, that's what is meant when, I think it's Engeström that introduced the idea of successive generations, and in that way of putting things, Vygotsky is the first, and Engeström was quite clear in the formation of the concept of the artifact-mediated action. Vygotsky launched the activity theory because he gave to activity theory its most fundamental concept, the artifact-mediated action.
And I agree, and that's in that triangle. But I frequently see first generations Leontyev, the 1987 publication as second, and then joint activities third. I've seen that kind of.
Yeah, so 1987.
You know
that's the expanding. Learning is expanding. Learning by expanding. Yeah. And then that's right. And I've read that one too. When he comes up with a boundary object, that you can actually have 2 units of analysis involved in the system, then this is a whole new generation. I've found that claim pretty outlandish, actually. because what's a unit of analysis if there's only one of them? And when you've got two units of analysis, you have to then create a whole new generation for your theory and call this a new unit of analysis, where we've got two intersecting systems of activity. I mean, surely if you had a unit of activity to start with, it allowed for the fact there could be multiples of them. But there's a lot of, I mean, the Engeström is difficult to understand sometimes because partly because of the set in this old sort of orthodox Marxist language from the Soviet Union times is difficult to digest sometimes. I think Engeström tends to move around with his meaning of concepts. I think you'll find if you read that book, The Learn by Expanding, he calls it a root model. He doesn't call it a unit of analysis. But in the second edition, he quotes me as saying that surely Engeström can't really mean that it's a unit of analysis. He says, yeah, I do mean it. It's a unit of analysis. Well, a unit of analysis for a problem can't be the whole problem, right? So if you say the unit of analysis in this old people's home is the old people's home, and here we've got the community and the tools and the rules and everything, that's an analysis by elements, not an analysis by units at all. If you say we've got a problem in this country, there are many different systems of activity, for example, the different industries, the different political parties and so on, then and all of these are systems of activity, and that's treating the system of activity as a unit. But you're right, in one publication that's even 2 units of analysis gets to be the third generation. I'll have to check up, and I'm pretty sure both formulations have been published.
Yeah.
That is 1, 2 and 3 is up there, 1, 2, 3, but also 1, 2 and 3 also for, you've got 2 generations in one publication, I think.